Today is Monday, September 28th, 2015, and this is episode 132 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell. Tonight we have a special episode that was recorded in Mr. Callett's car on the way home from DerbyCon yesterday. And without further ado, we will join that now.
So, we're heading home from DerbyCon, which means we're tired and hungover and our voices are shot.
Yeah, I can finally talk again this morning. At breakfast, I met up with Security Humor, and I could barely talk, but neither could he. So
it's a funny story about him. I used to work with him. We both used to work with him.
Right.
And knew him, like he's in Atlanta, and I was following him for probably 3 years before I realized it was him.
Which apparently is not an uncommon thing for him.
Yeah, so I felt dumb, but so we're passing Fort Knox for those who are following along at home. Just saw the sign for Fort Knox.
We're not stopping.
All right,
this time.
It's true. So, how was your derby?
It was good. I didn't get to go really to almost any talks. I think I made it to 2, but it was still great because I spent all the rest of the time actually talking with people.
Yeah, I found that you are far more popular than I am.
Well,
people apparently, you're Jerry Bell. Oh, and you're that other guy. That's what I learned at this DerbyCon. No, it was excellent meeting up with tons of folks, and given from last year's DerbyCon to this year, a lot more people knew of us. So we had a lot more fun chatting with a lot of cool folks and met a lot of really cool people. And it was almost one of those too many folks to even have quality time with, which kind of was an awkward problem to have, but a good problem, I guess.
Yeah, it was a good time. I had a lot of really great discussions with people, so look forward to next year. And I know we've apparently are going to potentially attend some other conferences this next year. So
yeah, a lot of people invited us to a lot of places. It's a matter of budget and time, but that'd be cool. And we've talked about off air that maybe we need to kind of put together some material for us to kind of do live. So maybe we'll start working on that. Giving some glimpses of the live Andy and Jerry Roadshow.
That's right.
Kind of like Mythbusters, but not nearly as cool.
No.
Well, they do a live show. Is what I mean.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
We didn't even do our intro, by the way.
We'll do that later.
Okay, fair enough.
It's the beauty of editing.
It's true. So I'm currently driving and podcasting, which is probably illegal in Kentucky.
True. So what did you think?
It was great. I planned to go to 8 talks. I went to 1.5. And it was, DerbyCon is always an excellent conference. It reminds me a lot of what DEF CON was like maybe 15 years ago, because I'm that old. It's very small. It's very inclusive. Everybody is friendly and open. There's not a bad vibe to it or whatnot, and really enjoyed the hallway con and the bar con and the lobby con and the meeting tons of cool people, meeting a lot of people in person who I knew on Twitter, who I'd never met in person. I'm realizing that my picture on Twitter is not helpful for meeting people in person, so I've got to fix that, because it doesn't really show my face. It shows like a 3/4 profile view, and it you can't recognize me from that.
See, there's your problem right there.
I think the problem is I'm not nearly as interesting as you are. I think that's really more
really?
more the problem.
Okay. Because you're not a pilot or into shooting or anything like that, right?
So what you're saying is I'm just too interesting? I intimidate people?
I think that might be it.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that.
You're overwhelming. Right?
You know, we'll go with that. I think that's good. There was a lot of good talks. One thing I like about DerbyCon is they specifically have different tracks. So there's not an overabundance of just red team talks or whatnot. So there's definitely a decent amount of blue team talks, and most of them are going to be online. So I plan to go back and catch some of them recorded. So hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up on the talks that I wanted to see but I missed. But it is just a wonderful conference for meeting up with people and having great conversations and trying to solve the problems of the world, and or at least commiserating over our shared miseries.
There's not a lot of stunt hacking either, which was
it's true.
Just kind of nice. It still is, I think, pretty heavily red team slanted, but there were some, what I heard, some really good blue team talks. I heard that John Strain's blue team talk was really good.
Nice.
So I gotta go watch that when it comes out. It sounds interesting.
A buddy of mine, Dennis Kuntz, did one on how to help basically cops catch bad guys, which apparently I did not get into because it was too busy. And then he scolded me for not just sort of being obnoxious and forcing my way in. But I guess went over really, really well. A lot of people reviewed that. Dennis is also running aptdefender.com, which if you're looking for some defense against APTs, you should check that out.
Yeah, you can get certified.
You can. Yeah, he's starting to ship some certifications.
It's like the Certified Advanced APT Defender,
something like that. Yeah,
or professional.
Right.
It's like it's CRAAP, I believe is the.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's important.
Yeah.
No, it's a great time. I will tell you, I'm tired. I'm not as young as I used to be, and I was not out to all hours of the evening like many people. I witnessed many, 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 many awkward hugs by Jason Street.
Some were very awkward, by the way.
Well, you gotta
like full legs wrapped around, and I mean the whole. Yeah.
That cop asked for it.
I ran into Brian Brake this morning, and he was looking kind of rough.
Yes. He was tweeting a little bit that he was rough. Yeah. We did a big podcast mashup with like 3 or 4 different podcasts, which I think is probably going to be a Charlie Foxtrot to listen to. But
yeah,
just
have the appropriate when I post it. Just go into it with the appropriate expectation, right?
Yeah,
it might it could be one to skip.
It's really tough to put 6 podcasters in a room and try to have without a script, without a game plan, and try to have a conversation anybody can follow. It turns into kind of I don't know.
It basically went like this: hey, let's go up to room 626. And, okay, so now we're all here. What are we going to talk about? I don't know. Record.
Right.
Here we go.
All right, everybody get your contribution points. Don't get me wrong, it was really fun to do. I fear that it's not going to have a lot of value once people listen to it, because it's going to be a lot of people trying to talk over other people. But it's the first time we've ever done a podcast with an audience.
That's very true. This is actually our second one.
That's true. Yeah, we've got somebody in the back seat.
Captive audience.
May or may not be a kidnap victim. We're not going to admit to anything.
He still has all of his organs, as far as we're aware.
By the way, this is a 6-hour drive, so this will be a 6-hour podcast.
Yes. Sit back, get comfortable.
Yeah.
Go get a snack. We'll wait. Okay, so you're back.
All right, good. So what was your highlight, Jerry?
Honestly, I think it was meeting people, like you said, that I have interacted a lot with and kind of gotten to be friends with on Twitter, meeting them in person. And just, unfortunately, it's very difficult to spend any amount of significant time with any one person. But it was just great to be able to to have that face-to-face connection. The thing that I like generally about conferences, and I've said this before, is it puts me into a different mindset than I find myself normally in at work or at home, where just I have more energy about creative energy, I guess.
Sure.
In terms of security, so I had lots of ideas and things that I wrote down that I want to think more about. So I would say it's really that. The first time I went to DerbyCon, I spent almost the entire time I was there in talks.
Right.
And to some extent, I kind of regret not doing that. But the reason I wasn't in talks is because I was actually talking with people, kind of one-on-one, or in a small group setting, which is really very awesome.
Yeah, I have the same sort of conflict of going to talks versus being social or meeting up with people, and I eventually came to peace with it. Of the talks are online, and these people aren't here every day.
Exactly.
For those following along at home, we're now passing the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historic Site sign.
And the right lane is about to end.
Right.
Yeah.
So
just so you know where we're at.
Yeah. Exit 91. Yeah, I definitely say that. Even though I'm kind of wiped out and tired, it definitely recharges me to go back and fight another day at work.
Yeah. I will tell you, it was interesting, and maybe it's like a confirmation bias kind of situation. A lot of the people that I met who listened to the show came up and thanked me for
thanked us,
or well,
thank
when they came
much.
up to me, they would thank me. If they came up to you, I assume they would thank you.
No, they thanked you, actually. Tell Jerry I said.
Anyway, thanked us for the blue team perspective, right?
We did hear that a lot, that we are one of the few focuses on the blue team. And apparently there's a lot of kind of market want for that right now. There's a market need.
Yeah. So
it was also interesting that we met a lot of people in very, very, very different industries who listen to us.
Yeah.
All over the spectrum.
Right.
Which is cool, but again, kind of, I'm always curious how folks find the show. And, again, never expected as many folks to listen as they do. And it's sort of humbling and flattering, for sure. But let's see what else. Did a lot of lockpicking. That was one thing that, in fact, last year was the first year I finally started to figure out lockpicking, I think thanks to you.
Yep.
And even entered a contest, a blind lockpicking contest, which I came in second out of 3 folks, and probably 18 out of 24.
But you're not only blindfolded, you're also handcuffed, aren't you?
That's true. Yes.
Yeah.
Which some people out there may enjoy that visual. I don't know. I'm not judging.
Yeah. They had the pink fuzzy stuff on it, so
it's true. I found that I can. In the locks that actually we had were not that tough. They're a type of locks that I've picked many times, but doing it blindfold for the first time under a clock is really tough.
Yeah.
And my game plan went to hell in a hurry. I had everything kind of laid out the way I wanted, and I had a key for a little kind of hideaway key for the. Sorry, I got to merge over here. Somebody's coming up quick behind me. A little key for the handcuffs, but I could not find the keyway. So I was fumbling with that, and I gave up on that. And then I started working on locks and trying to figure out which way pins are going, and then getting my tools aligned in there was a lot tougher than I thought. And then one tool went flipping out of my hands. I just gave up on that and found a backup tool, and it was interesting. I may have to,
But you did that, That's
I popped one lock, so in 5 minutes. So I
blindfolded in handcuffs.
So one in the first round, some kid, I think he was like 10, did 6. I was like, holy cow! So what I learned is it's a very different skill set.
Yeah.
And I've never even tried handcuffs before. Let me be clear. I've never tried to lockpick handcuffs before while they were on my wrists. So that was a new experience.
I mean, you've always had to take them off other people when you've had them locked up.
No comment. Not going to comment.
Like that time in Vegas, right?
Your mom told you about that, huh?
Oh, jeez.
So, but yeah, it's great. DerbyCon's great. I hear that they may be expanding it. They want to perhaps expand into, this is a rumor, unconfirmed, but I believe it's fairly well talked about, that they are looking at expanding into the Marriott next door of the Hyatt and increasing the amount of tickets and such sold.
Yeah.
Which,
it's not like there's if only there was a convention center across the street. Oh, wait, there is.
Which I'm of a double-edged mind, right? I like that it is a smaller conference, but I don't want it to turn into the ticketing situation of ShmooCon, which is the tickets sell out in 18 seconds. And I'm not exaggerating, if that. And don't get me wrong, Shmoo is an awesome conference, but the logistics of getting tickets for Shmoo are really frustrating to me. So I think it took 2 weeks or something for DerbyCon tickets to sell out. So, that tells me, in general, most folks, if they want to go, can go. There's also a massive amount of ticket resale that goes on as people buy tickets and then they find out they can't go, and tickets are allowed to be transferred. So it feels to me like if you want to go to DerbyCon, you can go, but they do have a cap on number of people. So expanding, gives more people the opportunity to go, I guess. But there's also a cultural aspect you want to be careful not to ruin.
Yeah, I think if you were to play it out over a number of years, the first DerbyCon didn't sell out until shortly before the show, and then the second one, I think like a month or two before the show, and the third one I think sold out in June. Last year. No, it's this one. I don't remember. I'm losing track. I'm tired. Anyway, point is, they're selling out faster and faster and faster, and I suspect, if you fast forward a couple of years, it could potentially be a day or two that it sells out, maybe even shorter if they don't open it up a little bit, because it is a good show, and it is good shows are going to be successful and draw people. And this is just kind of the inevitable, you're going to have one problem or the other, right? You're going to be too big or you're going to sell out in 30 seconds.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to be like inclusive, like, only the cool people could go, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. But, the other thought I had is I would encourage folks, if you have something you want to say, don't be intimidated about trying to give a talk.
Yeah.
Especially at DerbyCon. It's a very friendly environment. Aside from the, sort of what they call icing, which is, I guess, a thing where Dave Kennedy or others may interrupt your talk to force you to drink some sort of
warm Smirnoff Ice.
Right, which seems
really bad.
Which is kind of funny, but at the same time, if you're in the middle of an important thought, it can be disruptive. But anyway, aside from that, I think it's a really friendly environment to get your feet wet in terms of presenting.
Yeah, they have their stable talks, which are like 15 or 20 minute long talks. Good opportunity to get some practice, and it's a smaller audience too.
It's true. The other thing that's funny is there's a fairly sizable InfoSec community in Atlanta, and I run into people here from Atlanta who I know in Atlanta, but I never see in Atlanta, but I see them here. So It's like, we should try to maybe meet up in our own state.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people, and we really need, if no one else is going to be the catalyst, I think we're gonna have to step up and do something.
Because we're not busy enough.
Totally. So, anyway, before we started recording, we were talking about pen testing.
Yeah.
You want to talk about pen testing?
Sure. You want to frame it up, or like? I
Yeah.
think we were talking about the value of pen testing.
Right. So I think we're coming at it from a couple of different ways, and this could be a meandering conversation. The way I brought it up,
Like most of our conversations.
well, true. The way I brought it up is I observed that a number of the talks at DerbyCon, of course, I didn't actually get to see them, so potentially they actually addressed my
Allegedly.
concerns. All right. Anyway, the talks in the name have some derivation of winning, right? So how to stop losing at InfoSec and win, or can we stop losing and win, and losing battles and winning the war, and those kinds of concepts. And the thing that struck me as I was thinking about that is, what's winning and losing?
So winning is where you succeed over your opponent, Jerry, and losing is where they.
But on what timeline? I mean, it's a much different perspective from an attacker's perspective, because they can win. I mean, it's very deterministic if they win, and if you end the day, when you go home at night, did you win? Were you lucky?
And if you did have a breach, which seems fairly inevitable, did you lose?
Yes, exactly. You don't go home. I mean, most companies, when you have a breach or you get hacked, you don't pack up your stuff and go home. And
Right. I mean, some maybe over the long term,
but
it's not like, okay, well, they got root, we're done, shut it down. It's yeah, you're right. It's winning and losing in terms of InfoSec. I think is a odd phraseology, but it is one that speaks to defenders seem to be always at a disadvantage. The perception.
right.
And so I think a lot of people are trying to say, okay, how can we get better at defense? And using the concepts of winning and losing, just kind of speaks to human psychology fairly easily. But I agree with you, it's not a very precise nomenclature because, as many people have said, defenders have to be right all the time. Attackers only have to be right once. But that's kind of not true, because we can survive, as defenders, we can survive not being right. And the game doesn't end. It's a continuous
Right.
effort.
Right.
So
We go on. We come to work the next day and we clean up the mess and
right.
and try
Hopefully
to get
learn
better.
from it.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's more, the goal is to enable business and reduce risk to an acceptable level, or at least inform about risk to an acceptable level. You can't reduce risk to zero, which seems to be what winning is for some people in InfoSec, to reduce risk to zero. So you cannot reduce risk to zero, which means you also cannot reduce the likelihood of a breach to zero.
Right.
So it's more about finding that right balance, which is constantly changing. So I don't know. It's a weird concept, and I'm probably too tired to be very articulate around it.
But just being in business, period, requires taking risks.
Yeah.
And I think it's myopic and naive to think that we're going to be able to address all IT risk.
Yeah.
And so I think the issue, as we've talked about in the past, is being able to clearly articulate, identify and articulate what the risks are in a that and useful way.
As best we can.
Right.
We have finite resources as well.
Yeah. So that conversation kind of meandered into pen testing, right? Because pen testing is intended, for most people, to try to find the way attackers are going to get in.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess going back to the whole winning and losing kinds of concepts, a lot of pen testers, and I'm not saying all pen testers, right? But a lot of pen testers for whatever reason, because of the structure of the agreement or whatever, they'll find a way in.
Right. Yeah, it's not a holistic audit. It is this is my goal. I found a way in, and typically for lots of reasons, they may not look further.
Right.
They are basically focused on, can I pop a box to a certain level or a series of boxes? So great. You find one way in that's helpful, and you remediate that one way in. It doesn't mean that host that was audited or attacked is now secure. That one particular avenue of attack may be closed, but others are certainly present. And I think some people forget that. And so we've got the need for pen testing kind of built into some of compliance now and some regulatory environments, and people look at it as a best practice to get an annual pen test. And I do think they're valuable, but I think people forget all the caveats around them. They usually have artificial constraints that real attackers don't have. They're usually point-in-time tests. Now, I do think having your own red team is incredibly valuable, and doing pen tests are valuable. It can show viscerally to executives or those in denial about security issues that, yeah, we really have a security issue here. And it can drive some of that agenda. But I kind of like to think of a pen test as just one more input vector for vulnerability management overall. So, pairing that with vulnerability assessments and threat intelligence and monitoring for 0 days and all that kind of jazz, all comes together. But I do think focused, targeted pen testing is very useful. But the other thing I would say is that pen testing, or a penetration test, is such a broad term that means 1,000 different things to 1,000 different people. It is generally accepted as somebody trying to simulate the activities of a hacker or an attacker and breaking into a system and subverting that system. But the skill set, the capability, the focus, the experience, and the methodologies are all highly varied from pen tester to pen tester.
Yeah, and from that perspective, I've been wondering if we need a more organized way to think about the maturity of pen tests, right? Because, and by the way, it's not unlike the different skill sets you'll see in attackers, right? Because you have script kiddies, and you have automated bots and whatnot attacking you. But I think, at least my observation is, there's not a lot of recognition that there is a difference in capability between different kinds of pen testers and different kinds of engagements of pen tests, right? And so it is very different if you subscribe to a pen test, which is kind of a full spectrum attack, where everything is on the table, versus a pen test, which we often see, where it's the scope of the test is very defined. It's you draw a box for you can attack this particular thing, which is in a lab between the hours of whatever, right, and whatever, and you can't go outside that IP range, and you can't fish, and you can't.
Which, of course, a real attacker would not have any of those constraints.
Right. You can't do anything that would be a denial of service, mm-hmm, or potentially a denial of service, and on and on and on. And then you call that a pen test, right? And
which, in my mind, I think doesn't really do you a great service. I would much rather find those problems under a controlled, red team situation than when an attacker finds them.
Right.
I get that is an idealistic viewpoint of being able to say pretty much nothing's off limits, and let's find it because there's a risk of business disruption. But I'd rather have that business disruption under controlled circumstances.
Yeah, well, I think at the very least, we have to be cognizant that when we do something like that, it's not an actual, we're not actually simulating what an attacker would do.
Right.
We're simulating what an attacker would do under a very specific circumstance, which is probably not what would happen in the real world.
It's kind of reminding me of, let's use a sports ball analogy here for just a moment, which is shocking, I know, but I know, isn't that crazy? if the goal of football is to get the ball to the end zone, great. If that's really my goal, I have a whole bunch of ways to get there. But and that's what attackers do. That's my goal. I have infinite variations in the way I can get there, including leaving the stadium, coming in the back door, getting a helicopter and flying over the opposing team, whatever. But football actually has all of these artificial constraints and rules to level the playing field, literally, to force a certain avenue for that ball to go from point A to point B. And that is how I kind of think of pen testing. We are putting all these rules around it, which then doesn't truly simulate what a true attack would do. Now, all that being said, I still think pen testing is very valuable and useful. You just have to understand the caveats and what it really does for you. But it really can get executives' attention. It seems to be, it takes the esoteric and the theoretical, and it makes it very visceral, real.
Right. So some of the ways I've seen pen tests work well and not well is, a lot of organizations perform them on a periodic basis, and even if they don't always find every potential or every avenue into the data or into the system, taking the output of that test and looking for the underlying cause and going to address the underlying cause, not saying, well, we got in because there was a missing patch, or we got in because there was a default password, or we got in because whatever, right? And then you go and you change that password or you apply the patch. That's not the point.
Yeah, that points to a process failure somewhere.
Right. How did it get to be that circumstance arose, and how can you fix that consistently across your environment? And then the other is that when you have that test again, if that same problem pops up, which, by the way, is not an uncommon thing, right? You really need to think about what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Because that's not a great look.
One thing I've seen too that hasn't been a very positive thing in some of my previous experiences is when one group will use a pen test to politically beat up on another group in an organization.
Yes.
And try to score political points and further an agenda. And I think we all can very easily fall into the trap of, the network team just isn't doing what they're supposed to do. They're not patching their stuff. They're not enabling the right tool set. Fine, let's go get a third party to validate it because they're neutral.
Yeah, knowing what the outcome is going to be ahead of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And use that as a political stick to beat on the other team. And I get it. Sometimes that's the reality of the political situation, but that's not the ideal, sort of culture that I would want to build around security and working with teams. But the reality, sometimes that's just the way it is. And sometimes we do have to go to a third party to say the things that we are loath to say for political reasons.
I've gotten to thinking a little bit, and I think the contra is also problematic too. So we were talking with someone who, the developers often apparently contract their own pen tests, right? So I'm a developer of an application or whatever, and so I'm going to go off and contract a third-party assessment of my tool, and it just comes down to me, it seems like a conflict of interest. Now, maybe they do a great job and they hire a very thorough company. However, in my mind, back of my mind at least, there's an incentive for them to find someone who's going to do a kind of the meets minimum test, so to minimize their work.
It's also an incentive on the pen tester side. If your customer is looking for minimal pain, so that they can ship their application, and you want to make money next year from them,
You want repeat business, right?
There might be a subtle implication to not necessarily be as aggressive.
That's right.
I've also seen, if you've got a situation where, hey, you can't ship this into production until you pass this sort of testing. I've seen them, kind of fake the environment to get past the testing, which allows them to get their product shipped, which is what they're paid for, right, and what they're measured on, but really doesn't do anybody on the security side any good, and long term may cause pain. So we come back to a concept we've talked about a lot on the show, which is incentives driving undesired behavior.
Yep, that's right.
So, all that being said, I think pen tests are still very valuable. I just think there's a ton of caveats around them. And I remember back in the day, maybe 10 years ago, the concept was a pen test was the Cadillac of security testing. And I would like to think that we have matured past that to know that pen testing is one small aspect. I mean, all things being equal, I would rather spend the money on a thorough security audit review from a third party with a full white box, open door, open the kimono, let them look at everything, and then give us recommendations.
Yeah, I can see that. Kind of go back to something I said a little bit ago. I can't help but think that it would be helpful in some respect to be able to rate what you're getting in a pen test.
You want an Angie's List for pen testers?
No, not that. Not that. I'm thinking, maybe it's a grading scale or a...
You mean like a criticality?
A thoroughness.
Okay. Like a confidence level?
Yeah,
right.
Maybe that's the way to say it.
Like we given the constraints around this test, we feel that we have, tested 30% of your environment or something.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how it would manifest itself, but because again, not all pen tests are created equal. And my observation is in the pen test world, by the way, that pen tests in general are becoming a commoditized service that's performed by, kind of the least cost resource possible, because it is becoming a compliance mandate and everybody wants to do that crap as cheap as possible.
Which is unfortunate, by the way, because really good pen testers are worth what they charge.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's a giant rift between the people you just mentioned who are really good and, the people who are
running Cali
and, core or whatever. And that's all they know. They're not. There's not a lot of intelligence behind it. They are following. They're effectively following a script, right? This environment has. First scan the network.
Just a live update. Waze has given us a live route change, saving 32 minutes on our drive.
Wow!
Due to a major accident on I-65 South. We are living in the future.
That's right.
Thank you, Waze.
So yeah.
So the black helicopters following us are now going to have to
step it up.
Yeah, because we're changing our direction.
That's right.
We're also 8 miles from Mammoth Cave National Park.
I had no idea we were that close to Mammoth Cave. I just never did. So anyhow, pen tests becoming generally less valuable as a commoditized service, or at least the perception of it is. However, the problem is that for many, especially at the executive level, a pen test is a pen test is a pen test.
Yeah.
And so, why would I go spend, $100,000 with this boutique pen testing company when I can get this other company over here who will do it with, offshore resources over the internet for $12,000 or whatever. Why would I do that? Why would I spend 10 times more to get the same thing? And the point is, it's not the same thing.
Yep.
But there's not a good there's no differentiator. How do you know?
Yeah.
How do you convey that you're not buying the same thing?
When I was trying to sell pen tests as a sales engineer, one of the ways we would try to do is showing sample reports. Look at how thorough our reports are. But again, if you're talking at a very senior executive level, you're right. They may not have a deep enough technical background or care enough to see that deep into comparing and contrasting.
Yeah, it's kind of like, this is probably going to end up being a bad analogy, right? But when you buy insurance from an insurance company, they're rated A, B, C. They have different ratings, and the ratings have different costs, but they have different risks associated with them. And kind of intuitively, if the CFO goes to the CEO and says, "Oh yeah, we bought $1 billion in coverage from a AAA rated insurance company," or that same CFO comes and says, "Oh yeah, we bought $1 billion in coverage from a B rated company," the CEO intuitively knows that it's different. Right? He doesn't have to think very deeply about, what are the differences between the two. He just knows that there's a difference. And you're going to get less with, or potentially less with the B rated than with the AAA.
Maybe. Just to kind of nitpick your analogy for a second there, those are credit ratings of the credit worthiness, not necessarily the customer service capability.
No, I know, but at the end of the day, what you're buying with insurance is you want them to be able to pay out
as long as they'll actually pay out.
Right. That's right.
To go back to our cyber insurance story from last week.
That's right.
Yeah. And, of course, if you wanted to subjectively rate pen test companies, there's so many caveats. You could come in and say, well, the customer only wanted X. We tried to sell them on Y, but they didn't have the budget for it. And, X is better than nothing. So there's so many different ways to kind of get into that. Not everybody can buy a Cadillac. Some people have to buy the Yugo. And the Yugo gets them where they need to go. So it's a tough thing to measure. I think, at the end of the day, having a knowledgeable, experienced person helping to make the decision as to what type of pen tester to hire is your best bet. But again, that's non-trivial.
Yeah, fair enough. Anything more to say on that?
No, unless you do.
Okay. All right, so the next thing we wanted to talk about are a couple stories. The first one is...
Watch out, vehicle stopped on shoulder ahead.
Vehicle stopped on shoulder ahead.
Yeah, I'll mute my Waze here, sorry. There we go.
Comes from the National Trial Lawyers Association, nationaltriallawyers.org.
It's good read, by the way.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Riveting, in fact. So, the title is Seventh Circuit Court Grants Standing to Neiman Marcus Data Breach Plaintiffs. It's a relatively long article, but basically, the net of it is that the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals has approved the plaintiff standing in a case against Neiman Marcus for prospective financial losses associated from the data breach. So
not actual losses that have been noted yet.
Right, prospective losses. And, at the very end of the article, in the court's decision, they make the comment, why else would hackers break into a store's database and steal consumers' private information? I.e., there's an intent to harm. But apparently, according to the article, there were, I believe, only 9,100 or 9,200 confirmed cases of fraud out of the roughly 350,000 people's data who was stolen.
No, my question is, was that fraud that was noted credit card fraud, in which case it's really not the end user's liability anyway?
They don't actually say that. It's not very clear. So apparently, just to recap, there's a little more data than we've had in the past. So We did talk about Neiman Marcus. It popped right after Target and was kind of not a huge story at the time. There wasn't a lot of detail, but apparently what happened was there was some type of a central system that all of their cash registers connected back to, and the cash register, or this central management system, was pushed out malware to the cash registers every night, and it was deleted it. So it's not clear if it deleted itself or something else deleted it, but in the process, apparently, allegedly, it created something like 60,000 malware alerts. Now, what specifically a malware alert is in this context is not very clear, but one of the factors or contributing factors in this decision appears to be that Neiman Marcus did not pursue or investigate these alerts that were happening during the time period.
And we don't know what these alerts are. We don't know if it's like AV alerts. We don't know if it's just log files. We don't know if it's after the fact they went back and found evidence. The whole signal and the noise problem. So it is a little odd to know exactly what happened there or didn't happen. But 60,000 ignored alerts is one of the contributing factors that they're alleging.
Yeah, and so apparently the data was being consolidated and then exfiltrated through a VPN. Again, not a lot of detail on where was the VPN from the endpoint registers or the central system. No context on that. But the thing that struck me with this story is that it's more and more turning any kind of database of personal information that an organization might store into a significant liability.
Sure. Well, to me, I'm finding it interesting that they've basically held standing that even though no actual fraud has occurred yet, people can sue for the perspective of fraud. And I'm sure those who are victims say this makes sense. But to me, certainly I'm not a lawyer, but wow, there's no actual harm being shown yet. I'm not sure how they would figure out damages or understand, the costs involved. But you're right on your point too, that now it's starting to become more and more of a liability to maintain customer data and credit card data. So I'm wondering if companies are going to start moving to, you can't store that data, right? You got to re-enter it every time, which is now going to make a little more friction in the transaction. Or, tokenize everything, or, whatever. Because it is starting to become a liability, like you said, to have that data.
Yeah, and so I just want to be clear, right? The ruling here was to overturn I believe there was a previous court that dismissed the case, and so this decision basically overturned the dismissal. So it's not a decision in favor of the plaintiffs. It basically is a decision saying that the plaintiffs have a standing even though they have not incurred any damages. So normally you would need to, in order to have standing, in order to sue someone, you would have to have incurred a loss. Otherwise, what are you suing for?
Right.
And so in this, what's kind of novel in this particular situation is, we had 350,000 people whose data was stolen. Only a small fraction of them apparently was actually used. However, the entire group are able to go in the court, file, try to recover damages that have not yet occurred.
Which really is going to be interesting case law and dramatically changes the risk equation for retailers.
Yeah.
In my mind.
Yep.
Depending on how this goes, right? It could still go to court and the actual trial, that judge goes, no, sorry, go away. Or, who knows, right? This may still end up as nothing. But, and this could also be something, where lawyers are just trying to spin up class actions for, income generation.
The article says that if nothing else, it's going to cause a lot more it's going to cause a lot more lawsuits for breached companies, because now, right now, basically, the de facto position is if let's just pick on OPM, right? If the OPM impacted parties can't prove that they were damaged in some material way, they couldn't go and sue. If they were to file the papers, the defendant could very easily get that, get that case canceled or rejected, because there was no standing. The plaintiffs had no standing to sue. But now, if this continues on the trajectory it's on, those plaintiffs have standing, and so now potentially there's going to be a lot more lawsuits. And
as I understand it, they have standing because the assumption is something will happen.
Right.
Which is a weird law.
Right. Well, I mean, basically the judge said, why else would they? Why else would an attacker steal the data if there was no intent to use the data for malicious purposes?
But I'd be curious, statistically, of all the breaches we've seen, how much of that data is ever actually used fraudulently over a 1, 2, 3 year period?
It's hard to say. Very, very difficult to say.
If it's credit card data,
right?
Not that it's not important, but it's not the individual's liability. They have the hassle, yes, but it's not their financial liability. It becomes the banks and the issuers and everybody else, but not the endpoint user.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. There's no stats that I'm aware of about that.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you that actually kind of dovetails into the next story.
Mm-hmm. I know. I kind of planned it that way.
We did a great job.
That's called podcasting professionalism.
You did a great job.
Thanks.
Nice job. So, the next story we have is from Krebs Security, and the title is "Bidding for Breaches: Redefining Targeted Attacks." And in this article, Brian talks about a couple of online forums, which he describes as the eBay for data breaches. And basically, it's a marketplace where somebody who wants access to data or systems or what have you can go on to this forum and kind of bid it out. Say, I want plans for the Joint Strike Fighter, right, or whatever, and they pair you up with someone who has the ability or the interest to go and retrieve that for you, and then get paid for in kind for the merchandise that they provide you. And the point here is that I think this is kind of refining. This is creating a market where the attackers are becoming highly refined in their tactics, and kind of everybody now, or quote everybody, right, has the ability to leverage those deep skills in order to attack any organization at large,
or have a pre-existing foothold in that organization.
Yes, and it's a little subtle in here, but that is one of the points they bring up, that a lot of these, or at least in some instances, the people who are bidding on the work already have compromised systems or have already stolen the data.
Right.
And so they're just monetizing what they've already done. And this is something that's kind of been brewing for a while. If you think about it in the context of like a botnet, right? Botnets are becoming less and less used for things like spam and DDoS, and they kind of says, well, what are they being used for? And so I think the implication here is, if you have a bot that's kind of spread far and wide, you can use some segment of it for DDoS, some segment of it for spam, and the rest of it you can look and see, oh, I got I have endpoints within bank networks and endpoints within government networks and endpoints within, and then you can go troll these forums and monetize, the presence that you've established in those organizations.
So it's abstracting out the actual, attacking and exploitation from the people who may be leveraging whatever access or data that is being found there.
Right. Right.
And again, once again, I think starts to water down this attack can only be done by a nation state. Well, not true.
Right. Right.
Not true. Now, it may be ultimately paid for by a nation state, but it could be Bob the hacker in his basement who's built this botnet and then starts selling it off to the highest bidder.
And in this article, he references this person nicknamed the King, who is suspected to be someone working for the Chinese government, looking to steal data. And the reason they believe that is that he, or I guess she, pays very well, doesn't haggle over price, and and
pays timely,
pays on time, and reliably,
and appears to be very active in buying up all sorts of data. Right.
So, has a pretty significant source of funds and need for the data that he's purchasing. So it's kind of an interesting spin on the long standing discussion that the Chinese government has these legions of hackers, which maybe that is the case, maybe it's not, but now I think the point is that those kind of deep hacking tactics are again available for purchase by whoever.
Makes you speculate a bit. What if the Chinese government are just assembling a massive dossier and could do something really extraordinary with all that data in a very short period of time?
Yeah. And there's a they kind of dance around it a little bit, but they point out that much like we talked about in the Neiman Marcus story before, there's an absolute glut of databases being stolen, and apparently nothing being done with them. Nothing tactile that we can put our fingers on. Obviously there's in some cases there is, but in many cases, they're not. When the OPM data was stolen, people aren't running around opening, trying to get mortgages on fraudulent mortgages. We don't know what is happening with the data. And
well, it's interesting too, because then you think, well, okay, if there's this much data floating around on so many accounts, does that dilute the value of any one account? And are people hoarding this, speculating that the value will go back up? Are they? I don't know. It is weird that we're not seeing more mass exploitation of all this leaked data.
So one of a potential explanation. I'm not saying this is a robust explanation. However, they talk a little bit about some of the methodology, and that there's implications, maybe not direct assertions, but implications that some of the people here on these forums have the ability to identify spearphishing targets, or people who are ripe for being extorted, or who might be sympathetic to your cause. And I do wonder that if a lot of that data that's being stolen can actually be used by those criminals to create a graph to, much more.
Yeah, the data is only step one.
Right. It's
in a bigger con plan.
Yeah, it's to help. It's to help them in their business models. Basically, it's kind of like the crazy story about the Target sending the baby, newborn stuff to the teenage girl,
right?
And the dad gets angry. Well, they have all that data, they're analyzing it, and to an extent, I wonder if on the criminal side, this is an opportunity for them to gather a lot of information and figure out, okay, if I wanted to attack, Acme, how would I? What are the different ways in which I could do that? Now I know.
We're also attributing a lot more coordination and centralization that made it. But when you look at these forms that the story's talking about, that sort of stuff becomes a little more viable. For instance,
Right.
people pop up and say, "Okay, I really want to spearfish against Bank of America,
Right.
and who can help me hit these executives at Bank of America?"
That's right.
And okay, does anybody know any insiders at Bank of America who are sympathetic to the hacking cause or whatever it may be? Which now does start to stress. Now the challenge is these forms, and it's covered pretty extensively in the article, are very exclusive and require a great deal of vetting, which minimizes the ability for broad application across all sorts of nefarious groups. So, by necessity, they are, very, very underground, very hidden, don't last long once they get infiltrated. So I wonder how effective these sorts of centralization techniques and efforts work. Since
Over
they
the
have
long
to keep,
term, right.
because they have to keep moving and such. And I apologize, we're kind of in heavy traffic in Nashville right now, so I'm a little multitasking here.
It's certainly a headwind. I mean, he points out that Enigma was only online for a couple of months, and then the administrators shut it down because they feared that it had been infiltrated, which actually had been.
Yeah.
So they did. I think that's a legitimate concern. Although I would imagine that they can figure out how to keep moving around. I mean, there's apparently a lot of money in this.
Yeah, of course, and that's ultimately there's always going to be money in it, and that's always going to drive this behavior. It's just interesting because the more effective a centralized kind of work share site is for these sorts of things, the more likely it is to be infiltrated.
Yeah. And the thing that strikes me is this is just another example of the industrialization, I think, or the commercialization, the mechanization, however you want to phrase it, of more advanced attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not all these various attackers off trying to figure this out on their own. They're refining their techniques. There's pockets in there. I'm kind of envisioning like office buildings with receptionists and water coolers and things, and and instead of doing productive things, they're sending out phishing emails. Which, by the way, apparently, in reference in this article, it's very common for the people who are tagged or charged with going after and collecting whatever the prize is. The most effective ones apparently are the social engineers and the phishers.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Which, it shouldn't surprise anybody, but kind of points to the direction, I think, of maybe where we should be thinking.
Yeah, certainly. The other thing I think about when we talk about this article is, so right now we just had the President of the U.S. meet with, in essence, the President of China, and they came to a cyber security agreement of we're not going to hack each other. Well, is it truly hacking if China, through a third-party corporation funded by a third party inside of a third party in China, goes on one of these forums and buys data? Did they do the hacking, or did they just consume it?
That's a great point.
There's so many plausible deniability options here.
Especially if China if China is outsourcing to an Eastern European
right
hacking group,
And everybody says, only nation-state level resources could achieve XYZ. Well, first of all, I don't buy that to begin with. But second of all, this is a way for nation-state funding to flow into the underground hacking community.
Right.
And make it profitable for these folks to build a skill set full-time to the level of a quote-unquote nation-state based on this sort of, in essence, it's kind of like funding terrorists, right? They're pumping money into these groups and making it profitable for them to do these types of activities. Again, speculating, but I think it's fairly safe speculation and shows how it's very easy for a nation state, including the United States, to very easily outsource their targeted attacks.
Yeah, and I think it also points to the fact that attribution is hard and is getting harder.
Yeah,
and it's just another in my mind, it's another brick in the wall that says, assuming that these attacks are originating or emanating from governments is really a fool's errand. But at the same time, I think the other thing it says is our job is getting exceptionally more hard or more difficult, right? It's because the attackers are heavily financially incented to refine their tactics, because these are turning into enterprises, and they're being innovative. And just think about the average .com and how innovative they are, and think about that context applied to hacking.
Yep.
And here we are. So
yay, happy Sunday.
Yeah. But I just think it means that we really have to start thinking. I don't mean to be a downer, right? But I think we have to start thinking about that context, because that is the world. I mean, that is in place now, and it's probably going to get more and more in that vein. And how, what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
What does it mean for our organization? What do we do in response? So, the last story we had was a follow-up from a couple of months ago. Morgan Stanley had had some of their data of customers of theirs show up on an online forum for sale. And in the ensuing investigation, they found that one of their employees, a person named Galen Marsh, had actually accessed all of the records, 730,000 customer records, and exfiltrated that to his home computer, because apparently he was in the process of trying to find a new job. And allegedly, and I think this intuitively makes sense, in the world of financial analysts, you kind of are, your value is partly derived from the network of customers that you bring with you when you go to another firm.
Well, that applies to almost all aspects of sales.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So that was valuable to him. But apparently, what happened through some as yet unknown means, some of the data that he, I guess, stole ended up on a forum for sale. Now, he still admits that he did not post that data for sale. However, he has pleaded guilty. He's accepted a plea deal, and as part of the plea deal, he's agreed to accept any prison sentence up to 37 months.
Well, I think it said he won't appeal.
Well, he won't appeal. That's
Yeah.
right. He won't appeal.
Yeah.
Right. Which I guess implicitly means that he's...
It's an odd number, 37 months. I wonder how you achieve that negotiation.
Yeah.
But he pled guilty to taking a copy of the data,
Right.
not sharing it.
Correct.
Yeah.
He still disputes that he
Which,
tried to sell it.
again, intuitively makes sense if all the other assumptions are true, that he was looking for another job, it doesn't help him to leak his customer data.
Right.
And we know there's plenty of malware out there that its whole purpose in life is to monitor for data like this and snag it. So who knows? It's plausible that he ran afoul of some malware that grabbed copies of this stuff.
But it's interesting, though. I would have thought, maybe I'm overthinking this, but I would have thought I know that some law enforcement agency, I don't know, somebody would have analyzed his computer. So I assume that happened.
He installed Windows 10 and everything was fine.
That's true. There's your problem. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in as a follow up.
Yeah.
Still no definitive answer on how it got out for sale, but he did admit to doing it. I think based on how this came to be, it was pretty clear that he did do it. I would be surprised if he did admitted or chose a different path. But I think that, again, as we talked about when this story originally came up, it kind of points back to, yet again, if you have a big mountain of customer data, you really need to think about how you're going to protect that and monitor it. So in this particular case, I think the thing that helped Morgan Stanley a little bit is that they were able to go back and see that this guy ran queries.
Right.
And so they were able to pretty quickly track down, I'm assuming it was quickly, I don't know for sure, who specifically took the data. And there you go.
Which we often find it's trivial for folks after the fact, not trivial, but apparently easy after the fact to go recreate and reconstruct what happened, but it's really tough for people to detect it at the time and detect it because of that activity.
Yeah, at the same time though, I have to tell you, now again, every company is different, and whatever.
Everybody's a precious snowflake,
right? But if you have, if I would say, given what we talked about earlier, your customer data, if you are financial, if you have a team of financial advisors, one of the really key bits of data that you have, or your key database, is your customer list.
Right.
And it seems like there's probably no good reason for anyone to run a query of all of your customers. And so I think there's an opportunity there to look at some business rules to say, okay, the average analyst should never look at more than, let's say, 5. I don't know what the right number is, right? But let's say 5 records in a day. And, maybe if they do 6, it flags, but if they do 10, that triggers, somebody to go and,
investigate.
Bring them into the room with the hanging light over them.
Right. No cameras.
Right.
Padded walls for sound deadening.
And the hose.
Right.
Yes. So, anyway.
So, basically your basement.
But, yeah.
I understand.
Well,
But here's the thing. In a microcosm, that makes a lot of sense. But when you start scaling it up to enterprise-wide, creating those sorts of data access rules is non-trivial. And you have to really understand your business really well. You have to really understand how people do things. And it's a lot easier to just say, hey, you know what? These financial analysts need access to this data. Here you go. Have a nice day. And then not worry about it again. So it takes time and effort and creativity to start to limit the access in such a way that still allows folks to do their job. Because as soon as security throws something in there that gets in the way of a financial analyst, who in many ways is, the factory floor for Morgan Stanley to make money, security is going to lose that conversation most likely.
Good point. It's a very good point.
So you got to be careful. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm saying it's non-trivial, but it's important.
That's right. So I think that is, I guess, the end of our car cast, I guess we'll call it, right?
Our road trip podcast.
Yeah.
From on the way home from DerbyCon.
Yep.
And it's good. It's a different type of style. I can't look at porn in the background while we're recording. I can't reference notes. It's very extemporaneous. I can't even talk.
Extemporaneous.
There you go.
Is that what you're trying to say?
That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
I couldn't spell check on that.
Should I get my mom to help you?
She's not been as helpful lately.
By the way, someone's mom just tweeted you back.
Oh, really?
Yes. Gwen Kuntz, in fact.
And what did she say?
She wants to know why you would say that she plays games with you.
Well, because clearly it's true.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I don't even know who we're talking about. I have no idea.
Dennis Kuntz's mom. You were.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. There you go. So anyhow, thanks.
To end the show on that awkward note.
Thanks thank you for listening. Just a reminder, if you like the show, give us some love on iTunes. If you have any questions or recommendations, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. If you want to find links to the stories we talked about today, check our show notes on www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @DefensiveSec. Follow Mr. Khaled on Twitter @Lurg. Me on Twitter @MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again next week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
It's a podcast, goddammit.
That's all I am to you. I'm just your podcast monkey.
Yeah, it's the CarCast.
It is the CarCast. So, are we live or are we Memorex?
We are live.
Okay.
However, for others, it's recorded. It's very confusing.
It kind of is. Except for a passenger. We have a passenger who's
That's
getting
right.
a live view.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.